chance to formally welcome you yet. My name is Mike, and I'll be your guide today for this tour. Hello. Now, folks, regarding this topic, regarding this history here, I really could go on for hours upon hours upon hours. I've got hundreds of years of history I could cover just talking about what happened in this field behind me. The thing is, I realize y'all don't have hours and hours on hours, so I'm going to have to try and condense that to about 25 minutes. I'll do my best, but I'm only human. Definitely, in the interest of time, I'm going to have to leave something out. So to make up for that, I highly encourage questions on this tour. Y'all have any questions whatsoever? Feel free and ask. And start thinking of them as I'm talking to y'all. Because at the end of the presentation today, before you go check out the cabins, we'll have a quick Q&A. Answer any questions you got. But of course, that won't be your last opportunity to ask questions. When y'all are going to go check out the cabins later on, I'll be hanging around in this field. Just come and find me. If you have any answer, whatever you have. I'm kind of hard to miss. Big hat, big red beard, the hard blue shirt. I kind of stand out. Alright, whatever you got. Sound good, y'all? Yep. Well, folks, to start out with, let me give you some basic context for what you're looking at right now. These cabins behind me here, they are, of course, the former slave cabins, the Magnolia Plantation. These cabins are built by the enslaved, for the enslaved, in 1850. They're occupied until 1865 by those same enslaved people. And the four buildings that y'all see in the field today, these are just the four that still survive. There used to be 11 cabins in the field originally. The thing is, folks, while it is true that these cabins are occupied until 1865 by enslaved people, that itself is specifically true. I want to be very specific in how I phrase that. Because these cabins are also occupied after the Civil War's end as well. Occupied by the former enslaved, these are those few who chose to stay. Their descendants and others. The people who lived here after 1865 typically worked here as groundskeepers and gardeners. We'll get more into that later on. But for now, all you need to know, these cabins are 172 years old. They stand where they're built in 1850. They have not moved. And the last year that somebody called these buildings home was 1990. Think about where you were in 1990. Now, I don't want to make out the people who lived there in 1990 at least as just victims. Mainly because I know them personally, and I've had the chance to talk to them about their lives here. But at the same time, them and myself thinking that it is very much worthy of a moment of reflection. The fact that that is even a reality we have to talk about. The fact that somebody who's a descendant of a slave lived within a refurbished slave cabin on a former plantation in 1990 with no AC, running water, or plumbing. 1990.
Pick him up because he thinks there's so many sticks.
And in fact, folks, these cabins y'all see today, I almost don't have them to show you today at all. In 1990, when they were unoccupied, they were boarded up and nearly demoed due to neglect. But luckily for us, for the sake of preservation, these cabins were saved in 2009 and restored to the conditions you see them in today, giving us an opportunity to tell the whole story here. Because folks, this place has been open to the public as a tourist attraction since 1870. And you best believe from 1870 to 2009, stuff like this just wasn't on the menu. Didn't talk about it much. It's about time. Now, to start off that story, I really could go back to the very beginning, maybe 1619 or such. But I'm going to start this tour in 1670, the founding of Charleston. Folks, there's no way that Magnolia or Charleston would have existed without slave labor. It was built off the back of it. Charleston would become very wealthy for its role in the slave trade. It was the #1 wealthiest city in the United States for quite some time because it was also the #1 slave port in the United States. By that I mean more than 50% of all the people who were taken from Africa to the United States to be enslaved here were taken through the port of Charleston. This map that I'm showing you right now, for those of you who have taken high school history classes, you've probably seen something like this before. Map of the transatlantic slave trade. The various routes, destinations, and numbers of people taken. Something you may not have known though, or something you may have forgotten. Historians say that at minimum 10 million people were taken during this time, and at maximum 24 million people. The number you probably hear most often repeated is 12 million. That's the number this map goes with. It's a safe guess. When they arrived here on the shores of South Carolina, shores of Charleston, they were sold at the auction houses that y'all can still see downtown today. The Slave Market Museum, and sold places like this. Magnolia was established 6 years after Charleston, 1676. It was established by the Drayton family. The Draytons arrived here from their sugarcane plantation on Barbados. They brought with them 20 enslaved people. To turn this 500 acres worth of land they had purchased along the Ashley River to their own plantation. They sent those 20 enslaved people off to clear all this land. 500 acres, cleared by hand. To give you maybe a good idea of how much that is, if you don't know what 500 acres looks like, look at the map of Magnolia. We sit on 500 acres today. But when the enslaved were done, they got it done, clearing all that land. They were then told that the Drayton family had purchased yet another 700 acres. They cleared that too, cleared all these trees. By the time they were done with that, the enslaved were informed that the Drayton family had expanded Magnolia to nearly 2,000 acres of land, all cleared by hand. It took the enslaved nearly 2 decades to do it. And all along the way, they were testing what cash crops would make the Drayton family rich. Sugarcane was the first try, since they had done that before on Barbados, but here it failed miserably. And after that, they tried pretty much everything under the sun. Cotton, indigo, tobacco, that stuff grew here, but didn't make them rich like they wanted to. They tried olives, citrus, ginger, tea. They even tried harvesting silkworms for a little bit. Anybody ever heard of a silkworm plantation? A few of you? Most of you not. Did not work here. It wasn't until about 1710 they finally discovered what the cash crop of choice here would be. But I'm curious to see. Folks, do me a favor real quick. Raise your hand if you've taken a tour before this one. Here today. So you've taken a tour of Magnolia before this one? So pretty much, okay, so y'all have to. Okay. Now, without blurting it out, everybody here, you can partake in this. Without blurting it out, raise your hand if you know what the cash crop of choice here was. So you've been taking the tour, is that what he told you?
Rice.
Well, you blurted it out. But anyway, but yes, you are right. This was a rice plantation. And a lot of people, maybe y'all are an exception, but most people who take my tours have never heard of this. Rice here in the Low Country was one of the most profitable cash crops in American history, but also one of the most dangerous. A nightmare for people who had to cultivate it. To not get too much into the agricultural scene here, but to give you the basics, folks, rice fields need to be flooded. And they do that because rice stalks, all the rice grows at the very top of it. So as that stalk gets taller, it eventually gets top heavy and it will fall right over. So you get to kill 3 birds with 1 stone. You keep weeds from growing around the stalks, irrigate it, and keep it upright by flooding the field. The problem here is that other rice grains, in Asia, America today, wherever, they typically only grow about no higher than knee-high. Carolina gold rice, however, grew to about 4 feet tall. So it meant you had to flood the field about waist high.
That meant for the enslaved who were tasked to harvest that stuff, they would have to trudge on through waist-high flooded water on foot, their sickles, cut the tops of the stalks off by hand with a rice screw. Folks, that field, 2 to 3 feet deep, flooded waist-high with water. It had just been left alone for the past couple months to let it grow by itself. And you walk into that water, what are you going to find calling that field home?
Gators.
Everything.
Snakes.
Alligators, snapping turtles, water moccasin, leeches, breeding ground for bacteria, breeding ground for our state bird, mosquitoes. Brings not just malaria, also yellow fever. And that's not even talking about the whole slew of other diseases you got to worry about living in a swamp like this. To the point where living around here in the 1800s was not great news. If you ask anybody on plantations such as this one who knows, like myself, they'll tell you that the owners didn't really spend most of their time here. They always owned getaway houses too. The Draytons, for example, owned a house in Flat Rock, North Carolina, and a house downtown. They would spend most of their time in those places, getting away from this mosquito-infested, disease-ridden swamp that they forced other people to stay in. And that was even when they had the niceties of a Victorian-style mansion than it was back in those days. Much better compared to this. Living conditions of somebody in 1850 who was enslaved here. This cabin would be the home of average 12 to 18 people. Very tight space. There would have been no furniture, no beds, no tables, no chairs, no nothing. How else are you going to fit 12 to 18 people within one of those buildings? You sleep on the floor. To be specific, the adults would sleep on the floor, the children would sleep up in the half loft, you'll see. You go inside there later on. A boon on colder nights, heat rises and such, like that fireplace on a cold night. But also a negative, smoke also rises. The chimney would get rid of most of the smoke from the fire, but folks, when you walk into that cabin, look up. You'll see the ceiling is caked in soot. Imagine being a child sleeping up there. Warm from the heat from the fire, but choking on its smoke. A necessity to survive. Charleston ain't the coldest state in the Union, but 20 degrees at night some nights in the winter, it's pretty bad. Working 10 to 12 hours per day, 6 to 7 days a week. Living conditions of somebody producing that major cash crop of choice. Rice. To be specific, y'all, Carolina gold rice. Not named gold for the color, but gold for the value. The stuff was worth its weight in gold. 3 to 5 cents per pound in the early 1700s, which is nearly $15 per pound today for rice. This stuff is expensive, but it wouldn't last forever. 1865, end of the Civil War, passing of the 13th Amendment, 80% of Carolina gold rice, that same year. As soon as free will's in the picture, there's not enough money in the world to convince most people head back into one of those fields ever again. So it becomes quickly abandoned. Here at Magnolia, this place ceases to be a plantation altogether. They sell off most of the land to recover from debts the owners had incurred during the Civil War and opened what remained, their fancy gardens there, to the public in 1870. It's been open ever since. Folks, the cabins you see behind me, they were built in 1850 and stand where they were built in 1850. They have not moved, but today they've either been restored or preserved to reflect 4 different time periods along the path from slavery to freedom. Those dates are respectively 1850, 1920, 1969, and 1870. We don't just want you to look at what life looked like here before the war's end, but after it too. What life looked like here during the Reconstruction period, Jim Crow era, the Civil Rights era, 1960s.
the story does not end with the Civil War. Folks, I have two more things I want to share with you before I let you go check out these cabins here. But before I share those two things, for one, let me check my time. And two, stop. Your quick Q&A. If you have any questions I can answer. Do they have the double doors for two families? Yes. You'll see it when you go inside there, at least in the first cabin, whether it represents the slave quarters. Then it's split by a wall straight down. Typically they were families, but they weren't always related. In the end, two separate rooms. Yeah. Okay.
That one don't have a chimney.
Any other questions I can answer?
Represents different time frames.
So in the after 1990?
Yeah, you said there were people were living there in 1990.
Moved out. They stopped working in Magnolia. They don't work here anymore. The Washingtons and the Bowings were the last two families to live within these two cabins. And I actually don't know what they do today. Don't really talk to them all the time, but I had the chance to meet them a couple months ago. At a campfire, we had the chance to pick their brains and learn about what life was like here. But what they do today, I'm not sure. A lot of them are older folks, probably retired at this point. When they were here, like I said at the beginning, groundskeepers, gardeners, maintenance staff.
And it was still no water, the water and electricity.
Now, the water access here was a hand pump, which would have been a well back in the days of slavery here, same spot. Okay. So 12 to 18 people per cabin, with 130 people being the maximum at one point. Folks, assuming that's it for the questions, unless we got any more? Okay.
Well, the one other question I had is, I assume these were all field camps that worked out here in
What is that?
Yes.
Those are the peacocks.
It's an assumption.
It is.
Those are the peacocks.
Yeah.
Folks that worked in the house, or they live in the house or close by.
Close by. They didn't live in the house. They would have lived in a cabin that is gone now, that is much similar to these, that would have been closer to the big house.
Okay.
You're right that all the people who lived in these cabins were the people who worked the rice fields and such. Okay, folks, those two more things I want to share with you. For one, that